Rena Cohen serves as the president of Lake Cook Audubon, the local and largest chapter of Illinois Audubon Society. Rena was introduced to birding shortly after college graduation when she was able to witness the spectacle of spring migration in Point Pelee on the shore of Lake Erie in Canada, one of the best-known migration spots in North America. Her birding travels have taken her as far afield as Cuba, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Panama, Mexico, Namibia, and Botswana, but she always remains in the Chicago area in May to witness the daily migration waves of songbirds that light up her life with their beauty and songs. And with that, please enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, George. And thank you everyone for being here. That makes me sound like I'm a world-class birder. I'm not. I'm just an appreciator and enthusiast. I'm not an ornithologist. But whenever I can get outside and bird, that's what I do, and like to travel, because one of the great things about birding is wherever you go, there are different birds. This past weekend, I spent 4 days on a chapter trip in Southern Illinois, and believe it or not, 7 hours south of here, you can believe that the birds that are migrating from their breeding grounds in Central and South America are reaching there before here, right? But many of them don't come this far north. So a lot of things like Kentucky warblers and worm-eating warblers and stuff that are occasionally seen here, they're everywhere and singing everywhere there right now. So that's my story. Question, how many people have bird feeders in their backyard? Okay, how many people have gone on bird walks? Oh, okay, well, then you guys know all this, right? Okay, all right, well, here we go. Everyone knows that birds migrate, but what you may not know is that Chicago is an amazing place to be during migration. It's one, I'll tell you in a minute, but it is one on one of the major flyways in the country. And often, literally, you'll see some of these birds in your backyard. Most of the birds I'm talking about are not feeder birds. Most of them are insectivores. They glean insects from bark and leaves. So they won't come to your feeders, but if you have great trees in your backyard, which I don't, but I have had some in my yard anyway, you may see some of these. And right now, this is the beginning of the first wave of migration has already happened. And this is a Blackburnian warbler. We'll talk about him in a minute, but every day during migration, you can see beauties like this during migration. Now, you guys all know these birds, right? You've got downy woodpecker, American robin, cardinal, northern cardinal it's called, blue jay, male and female house finches, and goldfinch, right? American goldfinch. But do you know these? This is a fox sparrow. The first fox sparrow I ever saw actually was in Shaw Woods, now Skokie Nature Preserve, I think, right? Open lands. And I'm like, what is that big messy bird? And they're very variable fox sparrows, but they're always this kind of red foxy look color and gray. It's an early migrant and a woodland bird, you know, something that you'll see in the forest. The Canada warbler on the right, we're going to be talking a lot about warblers because they are the stars of the show. Very tiny, late arrival, end of May, comes from South America and goes all the way to the boreal forests of Canada, flies more than 3,000 miles on its migration journey. And we'll talk a lot more about warblers later. Eastern towhee, has anybody seen an eastern towhee? Yeah, right, in your backyard? Yeah, a front yard, okay. And that actually, it's a part of the sparrow family. And every bird has a different song. I'm gonna play a few of them for you. The way you recognize birds, sometimes you don't see them, but you hear them before you see them. The way I learn my bird song is through mnemonics. You know, you put words, or other people have already put words to the song. So that one is, drink your tea. And this is a wood thrush. A thrush, of course, robins are thrushes. And they have the most beautiful song. I think it was David Sibley, who has written a lot of field guides, called this bird song the most beautiful song of all. Sounds like a flute. And they used to nest in Shaw Woods. but the habitat there has changed, so I don't know if they're still there. So these are some of the migrants you'll see. And then how about these? Scarlet tanager, about robin-sized, is from Central and South America, migrates as far north as Canada, as many of these birds do. And they sound like a robin with a cold. They kind of have the hoarse, they sound hoarse, like horse robins. Below is rose-breasted grosbeak, which I saw male and female this morning at Wright Woods. And that is a robin who has had singing lessons. And on the right is a yellow-billed cuckoo. And we all know that cicadas are coming out, right? The last 17-year cicada invasion, this is a little bit off color. I was at Middle Fork, Savannah. My husband and I were with another couple, and there were 2 yellow-billed cuckoos. And the bird, they look alike, the male and the female in this case, but the bird that left was obviously the male because he came back with a cicada. He fed the cicada, he mated with the other cuckoo, and then he went off and he did it again. And we all had binoculars, but we only had one large scope, and the bird was kind of far away, and we were going, ooh, ooh, we want to see. So that was that when the cicadas come, cuckoos particularly like cicadas, is my understanding, and there should be a lot of good eating for some birds. Okay, millions of migrants. About 5 million migrating birds pass through Chicago each migration season. And that's about 250 of the 450 plus species seen in Illinois. This is actually a chart from St. Louis, but St. Louis is also on the same flyway. So you can see that the transient ones on the right outnumber the percentage of everybody else. The ones that are here all year, winter only and summer only. The birds that do stay here in summer do nest here, but most of the warblers don't. We'll talk about that in a minute. And I will now go through each of the 250 species that, just kidding. Okay. Chicago area, as I said, it's on the Mississippi Flyway. That's the green one. And it goes from Canada to all the way south to Patagonia. And the flyways, there's 4 major flyways in the country, and they relate to the path of least resistance, where birds can easily find food and don't have to go over a lot of mountains, and also find water. So the Mississippi Flyway covers 14 states, including, of course, Illinois, and roughly from the Missouri River west to the Appalachian Mountains. Over half of the birds that migrate rely on wetland habitats, so it's really important for the flyways to have a lot of wetlands, and this one does. The birds that, it's here somewhere, isn't it? Yeah, the birds take a shortcut. The birds that come up have to come across the Gulf of Mexico, don't fly over land. They take a shortcut over the Gulf of Mexico. And if you can imagine, you've seen hummingbirds, how small they are. And these birds are just somehow magically, they make the journey. How and why they migrate. Obviously to breed, to find food. We'll talk a bit about winter migrants that come down from Canada when the cones, like the pine cones, there isn't enough food, escape food shortages. Migration is triggered by changing day length. We don't really know, apparently, why, but something about the change of the seasons and day lengths triggers the biological clock and their hormones, and then they start this feeding frenzy and they feed up in order to do this massive migration. The sad part is only 50% of the young survive their first migration, and 80% of all mortality occurs during migration. Okay. How far do they fly? Well, this is a Connecticut warbler. It's one of the warblers that it's a skulker. You'll find it low down in leaves, sometimes very hard to find. He arrives at the end of migration, again, late May, sometimes they're still here in early June. And the reason is, look how far he has to come. He travels 6,000 miles. And he is called a Connecticut warbler, but he's rarely in Connecticut. He was named that because the first specimen that was ever collected was in Connecticut. He breeds in a very narrow band of boreal forest in Canada, and it has the smallest breeding range. It's that the orange, red orange up there, of any northern warbler. And he migrates to the Amazon River in South America in the winter. It's one of the warblers that everybody waits to see. And one of my best sightings was, how many people have been at Ryerson? There's, behind the visitor center, there's this path, it's called Warbler Alley. And I was there alone one morning, and this bird popped up right in front of me and stared at me for like a minute. And they're such a hard bird to find. It's like one of those wonderful things you never forget. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of take you through the year. We'll spend most of the time on spring. The winter visitors, these are some special things, again, special birds, special species that come down depending on what the food sources are, if they don't have enough food usually. So there's actually a thing called the winter finch forecast. The redpoll and the crossbill are both finches. There's a thing called the winter finch forecast where some people in Canada have people who fan out across the country and like look at the volume of pine cones and stuff that these birds eat. And they tell you, well, this year you might not have any redpolls, but you might have white-winged crossbills or there's also a red crossbill. So that's always something that birders look for. The crossbill has the crossbill, and again, there's two species of crossbill that we see in North America. He has the crossbill because it's very specialized. He digs into a pine cone and kind of opens it. And the white-winged crossbills and the red crossbills feed on different trees because the cones are of different shapes. The common redpoll, I'm sure you've all been to the Botanic Garden. By the Regenstein Center there's alders with these little things called catkins, you know, I don't know what, but it's little things that hang down in the winter, and they feed on catkins. Often, I don't think there was this winter, but usually there's a lot of common redpolls at the Botanic Garden in winter. Purple sandpiper is a bird, it's a shorebird. Most shorebirds, of course, are here during warm weather, but the purple sandpiper is a cold weather bird. And my fun story about that one is I was on Waukegan Beach about 15 years ago, and I was looking at my lifer, your life bird. The first time you see it, it's called a life bird. My lifer purple sandpiper, and there was an 11-year-old boy who was also looking at his lifer, and a man who's, I won't tell you, he's related to somebody pretty famous. Anyway, and they weren't related. The boy and the man weren't related. That boy, whose name was Sully, is now a bird guide in Alaska and just gave a program to our chapter. And I said, Sully, would you have imagined, you know, this all these years ago? It's probably 15 years. I think he's almost 30 now. And this gorgeous duck called a harlequin duck that you'll see sometimes in the lake. And they're usually pretty close to shore. All of these are males, by the way. Many, as you probably know, many birds look, the females and the males, if they look different, they're called dimorphic. But I think all of these, well, the harlequin, the female looks very different. So these are some of the winter visitors, and then a few other winter beauties. Again, Waukegan Harbor is great and Winthrop Harbor, great during the winter for gulls and winter ducks. Great black-backed gull. First time I saw that guy was in Newfoundland, but he occasionally shows up on the lakefront. I've seen him in Winthrop Harbor. Hooded mergansers. I don't know if any of you have seen these. Gilson in Wilmette often has hooded mergansers, and they're usually a winter bird. And then there's the snowy owl, who's the Harry Potter owl. And on that one, my mentor, whose name is Jeff, this was, again, maybe 15 years ago, he called me one day. I was in my home office. I work at home. And he said, I'm on Gilson Beach and I'm looking at a snowy owl. And I said, wait, don't move. I'll be right there. And that was my lifer. I've seen them also again at Winthrop Harbor on a garbage can. And just pulled up and there he was. But again, they aren't here every winter. But these are some special things that you do sometimes see in the winter. By about late February or March, as I said, I'm going through the year. Has anybody seen a woodcock? Okay, okay. So this bird comes, it's actually a shorebird, but he does not live in water. He lives in the forest and he hides during the day. And at dusk, pretty much about 10 minutes after dusk, he begins to peent is the name. I'll find the sound. And he's looking for a mate. So he's peenting, trying to find a female bird, and he'll make a sound, and then he'll turn again, and then he'll turn again, and then he'll turn again. So it sounds like he's farther away. Then he does this sky dance. He goes up and does this aerial display, and his wings make sound, and then he dives down, and then he does it again. That's the peent. That's the peent of the woodcock. Okay. All right, okay, that's enough. Thank you. Okay, so that's late February, early March, they arrive. And then in March, the waterfowl migration begins. And every year my chapter has a walk we call the Loons of Lake County. And as you all know, there's many lakes in Lake County, and some years we actually get a loon on every lake we visit. We obviously don't visit every lake, but it could be eight lakes and you'll get a loon. That checkerboard pattern on the back is something that only happens when they're in breeding plumage. You'll see in the next slide what they look like when they're in what's called basic plumage. And then American white pelicans, which are not brown pelicans. These birds live in the West. Until 30 or 40 years ago, they did not come as far east as Illinois. The first time I saw them, I said, come on, a pelican? But yeah, so they've changed. They're spreading east. And the other one is a very small bird called a horned grebe. That is breeding plumage. That gold and stuff, they don't have it. Again, they look all gray if they're not breeding. And one thing I didn't say is that does anybody know what Lake Marie is in Antioch? So I guess I think that's McHenry County, is Antioch McHenry County? But there can be in late March, 90 loons. I have seen 90 loons and 90 pelicans on that lake at the same time. So that's always the highlight. That's the end of the trip every year because it's always good. And this is what the loon looks like when it's not in breeding plumage. And you can see in the yellow, this is very unusual to have a bird that is like really countrywide. And the yellow is the migration, and then you can see they breed far north. Has anybody seen them in Minnesota or heard them? They have this ogle, 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 very haunting song. Okay, then March, other March, here's a few of the other layers, like 20 different waterfowl ducks that come through in March, late March, early April, and here's a couple of them. I think the most beautiful is this northern pintail, and South Padre Island in Texas, they winter in Texas, and you can see hundreds, all in one place. But they're beautiful. And this ringneck duck, you see how he has kind of a notch here? So when you see him far away, that's what you see for the identity. And when my husband and I were first starting out birding around, we started birding a long time ago, but when he first started birding seriously here, every year he would say, what is that duck? So we have a joke that he gets a new lifer ringneck duck every year. He gets the same life bird every year. Okay, then spring, and here we go. The Magic Hedge is the Montrose Bird Sanctuary in the city, and it's actually nationally famous. And I was there on April 14th, and these were the new arrivals that day. Yellow rump warbler, and again, we'll get to warblers in a minute, but they are the kind of like the advance battalion that arrives. and they were everywhere. I'll bet there were 100. They had come in overnight. They were not there the day before. Northern flicker, you see that in your backyard all summer. This is a woodpecker, but they had just come in. And then the hermit thrush, which looks kind of like the wood thrush that I said had such a beautiful song. This bird, again, another thrush, and his field marks, that rusty red tail, and he kind of, he lifts his tail. So one of the ways you identify birds is behavior. He lifts his tail while he's sitting. So he's the first of in his genus. There's 4 other thrushes, 3 of which come through Chicago, and he is the first. Then also at the hedge that same day, up here is the purple finch. This is not your house finch from the backyard. John James Audubon famously called him a bird dipped in raspberry. He has a much more conical nose. His entire body has red. Your house finch does not. He has a little bit of red up here, nothing here, nothing here. This is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. He is a woodpecker. Ruby crowned kinglet. I had a bird, had one of these. Has anybody, do you know what, has anybody seen this bird? Very tiny, like 3.5 inches. And they flip their wings constantly while they're feeding. And the other day I had one in my front viburnum, and I'm like, I thought it was a moth. That's how small it was, because I didn't have my I wasn't looking through my binoculars. So you know, when you're looking through binoculars, it enlarges the bird. And white-throated sparrows are all over the yards right now. They're in also, and there were a lot that day. And then the other cool thing that day, there were 2 long-eared owls at the hedge, and they are never here, rarely here in spring. They were right together on a branch, and they were in a tree. I can't remember what kind of tree, but they were hidden. I mean, if somebody hadn't told me that I was there, that they were there, I would have walked past them. So that was really a thrill. And then the burrowing owl is something that a very much smaller owl, the long-eared is smaller than a great horned owl. Burrowing owl is about the height of a robin. They're very small, and they live in the West. And the first time I saw them was in the Pawnee grasslands. They have little burrows, and they sit on top of them. And if you're in the right place, you see them dotting the landscape. This was a vagrant, shouldn't have been here. He was in the dunes at Montrose. That day I didn't see him because it was very windy and it was hunkered down. But there's a lot of birders in Chicago, and there's a lot of reporting on this stuff, and he had been there for a couple of days. So it's all in the winds, migration. You know, when birds are coming in the spring, they're coming from their breeding grounds, mostly, well, south of here, but most of these birds are, from their wintering grounds. Most of these birds winter in Central and South America. And you can see, this is a application called Birdcast that shows how much migration there's going to be. The purple means nothing. The yellow is like gangbusters. And you can see this was a couple nights ago. So it has been pretty crazy birdie all over the area for the past few days. And again, this is like the first wave of big migration. Okay, a few other May arrivals. We all think of sparrows as those house sparrows that are actually invasives from Europe, but this little Lincoln sparrow, he's the cutest little thing, and white-crowned sparrows, which are they're in right now. I saw a bunch this morning at Wright Woods. Baltimore Oriole, some of you may feed these with your oranges. I saw these for the first time this morning, for this season. And brown thrashers, which are mimics. If you ever hear a bird, he'll repeat multiple times, and he's usually calling from the top of a tree. And you can see he's very large, much larger than I'd say he's larger than a blue jay. So this is just a couple of other kinds of, I'm just giving you a taste of the joys. And then the stars of the show. Okay. My title slide had the Blackburnian warbler, and that's the one on the left. He's also called the flame throat. 36 species of warbler pass through Chicago during spring migration. A handful stay to nest, these two don't. And as I said, these are insectivores. They won't be at your feeder. The Blackburnian, great story about this one. It's often when somebody gets turned on by birding, it's often this bird, and that means that's called a spark bird. What's your spark bird? What gets you interested? Does anybody know who Phoebe Snetzinger was? She was Leo Burnett's daughter. Leo Burnett, advertising Leo Burnett. She grew up, she was raised in Lake Zurich, and I believe she was diagnosed with leukemia when she was in her 20s or early 30s. She had children, and she saw this bird, and she decided that she was going to spend how much time she had looking at birds. Well, she died with her binoculars on after she had seen almost 8,400 species. She traveled the world and I think left her children a lot. There's a book called Lifeless that's great, very easy to read about her life. She was, I believe, in Madagascar. She was in a bus on a birding tour. She was wearing her binoculars. She was leaning against the window. The bus had an accident. She was the wrong place, wrong time. So, and it was about 35 years after her diagnosis. So, localized, the local girl makes good. And there are only about 10,000 species of birds in the world. So for her to see, it was 8,398 species she saw. And this chestnut-sided warbler, his song is, please, please, to meet ya. Again, I'm just giving you kind of a taste. Black-throated blue, I saw this yesterday at a little park in Highland Park. He's gorgeous. He says, I am lazy. And he is usually eye level. Another way you identify the birds, again, I said is by behavior, but some of the warblers are at eye level and some of them are very high, depending where they feed on the tree. This Cape May warbler is high. It's feeds very high. And one Mother's Day, we have a 3-season room on the back of our house. And it was Mother's Day. We were eating on the porch, and there was a Cape May warbler that was in the viburnum back there, just hung out for an hour. So, and that was really special. I've never seen in my yard otherwise. A couple of others, hooded warbler, who'll knock your socks off with that black hood. Black and white warbler goes up and down trees to glean it from insects and also on limbs. Magnolia warbler, you can see the streaks here. And if you saw it from the bottom, which sometimes you only see, it's called warbler neck. You're looking up here. And sometimes you only see these birds from the bottom. And he has a white undertail covert, this is called. But if you saw the tail, it's got a black line. So they call it a tail dipped in ink. So that's sometimes how you identify that. And northern parula is also a bird that is often at the top of a tree, and they sing like a zipper going up. And finally, this is my last, I think this is my last warbler slide. Golden winged and blue winged warblers, these two hybridize sometimes so that they mate, and then there are subspecies that are called something else, Brewsters and something else. I was at Ryerson many years ago, this when I was first starting to bird around here, and I saw my lifer golden wing and blue wing in the same tree. And it's so memorable, I could probably tell you which tree it was. The red start here, this is the male, female looks very different, but both of them have this fan tail. And this black-throated green warbler, who the way you identify his song is trees, trees, murmuring trees. So those are warblers, and most people really wait for spring because of the warblers, but there are others, other species, obviously, other families. There are vireos, which look like warblers. They're about the same size, but they move slower and they have heavier bills. The one on the bottom, the red-eyed vireo, nests here. They nest very high in the tree. You usually can't see them. You usually also can't see the red eye. And I'll try to find his song. The yellow-throated and the blue-headed, which is my favorite, are only migrants. So they migrate through, but the red-eyed stays. So the demonic is, here I am in the tree, vireo at the top, because it's three-part each, and he goes over and over like that. And I have a thing, they constantly sing. There was a record made a long time ago, 22,000 songs in 10 hours. he's saying, just they keep singing and singing and singing. Okay, that's the vireos. Then you get flycatchers. It's another family, and I said they come in all sizes. The least flycatcher is the least. He's just about 5¼ inches tall, high. And the Eastern Phoebe, I'll go back to these, but 6½ to 7. The Eastern Kingbird is 8½. And note, again, when I'm telling you about field marks, this white wingtip is a field mark, because sometimes you don't see the whole bird. And then the gray crested flycatcher is 8¾ and I love him because he has so much color. This is rusty, this is the rusty wing, and they have flycatchers tend to have these great big round heads. All flycatchers perch in one spot and they watch for insects, and they go out, they grab the insect in the air, they often come back to the same spot. There were the phoebes you will often see under a bridge, and they're always at the connecting bridge between, and I mean, they're all over, but I saw one today. So between Half Day and Daniel Wright, they're always there. Okay. Oh, I was also going to tell you that if you look at that least flycatcher, there are 3 other species that look very similar. The least is pretty easy to identify because he's that really teeny tiny bill and that eye-ring, prominent eye-ring, but there are 2 in this family that look so identical that you can only identify them if you hear them sing. A willow and an alder. Okay. So most of these have been forest birds. I just want to give you some idea of habitat. These are grassland birds. Now grasslands are disappearing. They're the habitat that I think is declining the most because a lot of it has been taken over by agriculture. But Rowan Savanna is a grassland, and Fort Sheridan was a grassland, but they are trying to turn it back into a savanna, which it apparently was 150 years ago. But grassland birds are in sharp decline nationally, 34% loss since 1970. The bobolink and Henslow sparrows, which we'll see on the next slide, have lost more than half of their population in the last 50 years. The bobolink looks like he's wearing a backward tuxedo, right? He winters as far south as Argentina, breeds in Canada, and he flies 5,000 miles on his migration journey. They are called rice birds. They like to feed in rice fields, and before it was illegal, farmers would shoot them to protect their crops. They nest on the ground, and their nests are destroyed because they mow agricultural fields. And of course, habitat loss is also contributing to the decline. Eastern meadowlarks also declining, also nest on the ground, and their song is Spring of the Year. And then dickcissels, they call it a miniature meadowlark, but it's smaller, and you can see it's really a very different looking bird with all these this crazy coloration and this little, crest right here. Most also winter in South America, and it sings its name. It goes dick-cissel. And the first time I was how many people have been at Rowan Savanna? Nobody. Oh, so the first time I was there, it was a farmland, and then they took out the drain tiles to restore the habitat. And the first time I was there, which was probably 12 years ago, there were dickcissels all over. Now it's harder to find them, but you can. Glacial Park often has them. late May, early June. So that's some of the grassland birds. Here's a few more. The Henslow sparrow. Now, I put these so you can see how it's sometimes so difficult to tell the birds apart, right? Until you've trained your eye. The Henslow's has that kind of olive face, and he has the whiskers, and he has this little 2-note song. It's like like a feeble hiccup. It's chilick, chilick, chilick. I'm not saying it right. And then the Savannah sparrow also has yellow on it, right? But it only has that, it's up here, the yellow lores. There's these you'll see all over Fort Sheridan, and they have a song that's take it easy. So those are grassland, and then because we haven't had any raptors yet, these harriers you can see elsewhere, but often you will see them flying low over a field, like a grassland, and the male is on the right, and I rarely see them. Like I think maybe only once in my life I've seen a lot of these and the immatures, but they're called the gray ghost. He's all gray on the back, and they have this owl-like face. But in addition to having great vision, the facial discs from the owl and the feathers help him hear. And so that's one of the ways he hunts. Who knows about Monty and Rose? Okay, so Monty and Rose, I'm going back to Montrose again. They're piping plovers. These are now we're going to shorebirds. Piping plovers, very small bird. They used to nest in the Great Lakes. They used to nest on Waukegan Beach. And when about 15 years ago, Brad Semmel, who works for Illinois Department of Natural Resources, he found a nest on Waukegan Beach, and he said it was the highlight of his career. He was so excited. But in 2019, these two birds came and nested on Montrose, and a birder who is very active in the birding community named them Monty and Rose, Montrose, Monty and Rose. They have their own Wikipedia entry. They were famous all over the country. The reason is that they were the first piping plovers to nest in Chicago since 1948. And they did have a clutch of three young that year who were on the bottom. And that's despite the fact that where they were nesting got flooded out because it's in the dunes on the beach. I'll show you a picture in a minute. And they had to, I think the IDNR, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, took the eggs to protect them and incubated them at Lincoln Park Zoo, and they hatched. And then Monty and Rose came back, I think the next 2 years. And now they're one of the young from their second clutch, from their second year, whose name is Amani, just returned to the beach in last week. When these birds were nesting originally, this is where they nested. Look, this was a volleyball court. So they had to protect it. It's now protected. And they got 150 volunteer monitors to watch to make sure they wouldn't be predated and protect them. So it's really an amazing story. And I believe there's now also some piping plovers on Waukegan Beach that I don't know if they've nested in the past, but there are monitors there too. Okay, other shorebirds, just a few others, again, to show you the variety. The American avocets here, this is actually a photo from Montrose in 2022, but this year, like 2 weeks ago, there were more on the beach. These are 17 to 18 inches. They winter on coast and in Mexico. They breed largely west of the Rockies. And again, that was April 2022. Over here, the Wimbrel is 15 to 19 inches. They fly as far north to breed as Alaska, and they winter on the southern coast and South America. And there was a Wimbrel at Montrose yesterday, and in the next picture, I'll show you something else about the whimbrel. The black-bellied plover, absolutely stunning bird. In his non-breeding plumage, he's completely gray. And then the spotted sandpiper, which we call spotties, they bob a lot. And again, when they're not in breeding plumage, they don't have those spots and they don't have the orange bill. And they also, lots of them are easy to see on Montrose, but they're all over. I was on a bird walk, and this is because I almost completely revised my 2012 presentation I did, but I wanted to use this picture because we were on this bird walk and people told us there was a whimbrel on the beach. And we walked all the way, I don't know if any of you have been on walking on the beach, but all the way around to where the power plant is or was. And we're all looking this way. And one of the birders, one member of the group, turns around, she says, there it is. If she hadn't turned around, we would not have seen it. So, and that's the only time I've seen a whimbrel in Lake County. So that's the whimbrel story. In the fall, the birds come through to go to their wintering grounds, but they don't sing, so it's harder to find them, right? They're not looking for mates, and many of them change plumage. Either they lose their breeding plumage, or a lot of them are young that have been born on their breeding grounds, and they don't have their adult plumage yet. So if you look up here, there's a little bit of a difference between the warbler, the black-polled warbler in the spring and the fall. That's the same bird, the same species. Same thing with the bay-breasted warbler, spring and fall. Here's another shorebird that's spring and fall, Dunlin. And the chestnut-sided warbler that I told you was pleased to meet you. The spring is on the left. In the fall, this is probably a young, but this is how they all look. And when I first saw them, what is that bird? Because they changed so much. Are we having fun yet? Okay, now we're in November, we're almost done. Hawk Watch in November, well, it really starts, I think, late September, but there are 2 hawk watches in our area, one in Zion, which has been there about 20 years, and one at Fort Sheridan. There's people who sit out there every day, and they look for raptors as they come over. And, oh, I don't have my notes here. Well, oh, wait, I have this here. 1 second. You really have to be good to be able to spot. They can spot a bird the size of a finger, that's so far away, it's the size of a fingernail, and they can tell you what it is. It's just amazing. But I just want to tell you that here. This was early in the season. It was like September 22nd, I believe. And they had already had 285 broad-winged hawks, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and 432 raptors overall for the season. Broad-winged hawk is on the left. You can see, again, I'm going to talk about field marks. One of the field marks is this black leading edge of the wings, and of course the banded tail. And this is a rough-legged hawk, and they are very variable, but they all have this kind of circle here. And this is a falcon hawk, but it's a raptor, but it's a falcon. This is a merlin, and they're much smaller. They are about blue jay size. And it's just got them flying and perched. Who has seen or heard the cranes fly over in November? Sometimes there's just, you hear them, right? Usually before you see them. And they are heading to Indiana, to an area called, the ones who are flying over Chicago, to an area called Jasper-Pulaski State Wildlife Area, I believe. That is the 2nd largest staging area in the country for sandhill cranes. The only one larger is the very famous Platte River in Nebraska. And of course, they're nesting. Has anybody seen the cranes around you? I was at Lake Forest Hospital. There were a couple of young already. The young are called colts. Okay, so then we're in November, and this is my last bird slide. Then there's a couple more vagrants. These birds do not belong here at all, okay? The painted redstart, last May, two friends of mine were in Lakewood, birder friends, Lakewood Forest Preserve. This bird, painted redstart, it is a bird, I just saw it in Arizona. It's a bird of the West. It was the first state record of a painted redstart. Now, they might have been here before and nobody saw them, but that was a very exciting thing. Limpkin, do you know about the limpkin? There was a limpkin at Melody Farms, and also one at Botanic Garden that came last fall. And they are a bird like you see in Florida. But all of a sudden, they kind of erupted. There were, I think, about 45 seen in Illinois last year. They think it has something to do with the food supply, but they don't really know. The reddish egret down here, again, is a bird you'll see in Florida or, you know, on the coast. There was one at the Botanic Garden for 3 weeks in 2012, and I live 5 minutes from the Botanic Garden, and the day I went was the day the bird left. Because I was too busy working, which is a terrible thing. And does anybody know about the whooping crane from last week? Okay, the whooping crane is a very endangered bird. This bird got lost from a flock that was flying south. He landed on a yard in Wilmette, in front of somebody's yard. There were only 20 whooping cranes in the 1940s. Now there's about 850 in the whole world. Okay, and you see the leg bands. They band these birds when they're born, and you can tell by the bands who he is, which bird he is. And this bird is number 16-23, which means he's the 16th egg hatched at the International Crane Foundation in 2023. I once was at Necedah Wildlife Refuge in Wisconsin, and at that time, they were training the birds, whooping cranes, to migrate using ultralight aircraft. And we had hoped to see that, and it was terrible weather. So, not terrible weather, but it wasn't good weather for the ultralights. So we went, oh, shoot. And we're on one end of the preserve, and the person who was guiding us, who, you know, worked there, got a phone call, and she said, okay, in 5 minutes, we have to be in the blind. There's the blind. They're going to exercise the birds. And the juvenile whooping cranes are cinnamon. They have a lot of cinnamon on them. And they were as close to us as I am to you. But they couldn't see us because we were in the blind. So that's exciting because it's obviously a very rare bird. Okay. Migration threats. A couple more slides and we're done. Good. Building strikes. So this birdcast map was from this famous horrible night last year. You probably heard about it. Up to 1 billion birds die annually in building collisions, and big cities, because of their lights, are a major problem. In October 6, 2023, more than 1,000 birds died at McCormick Place. It was national news. And this was what the Dave Willard, who is the former retired bird collections manager at the Field Museum, called he got there and there was a carpet of dead birds. And he has been collecting dead birds from McCormick Place for 40 years. And I believe, hold on. That night there were 1,000 birds that gathered. Songbirds migrate at night. So I think, did I say earlier, they navigate by the stars and the sun and the moon, and the lights confuse them. So they'll crash into a window. So that night, 1,000 dead birds were gathered at McCormick Place. There were over 450 dead birds and 300 more injured ones that were gathered by a group called the Bird Collision Monitors at buildings around in Chicago. They do that all the time during migration, but that day it was pretty, they collect the birds, but that's how many they collected that day. McCormick Place traditionally has not participated in this thing called the Lights Out program, where big, tall buildings turn their lights out during migration season after 11 at night. I think they're, at least publicity wise, they say that they're changing and changing their policies, and they might be doing something about their windows. There is, I can't remember, there is a place in New York, a building in New York that changed the kind of window glass they use, and they had been another killing field of birds, and now they aren't. So, okay, migration threats, so that's that. And the other threats are habitat loss. Here you go, I'm not gonna read them. Over 3 billion birds lost since 1970. Habitat, this is kind of shocking. The equivalent of 130 Yellowstone National Parks of grasslands have been converted to agriculture. That's why grassland birds are declining. Pesticides contribute to the die-off of honeybees, which pollinate the flowers, which the birds need to eat. Outdoor cats kill over 1 billion birds every year, more than any other man-made threat other than habitat loss. Plastics are a particular threat to marine birds because they ingest them and they also get tangled up in them. Climate change, I'm sure you've heard the study, nearly 400 North American bird species are at risk of extinction due to climate change, global warming, et cetera, sea rise. There have been 2.5 billion migratory birds lost, 28% in about the last 40 years, including 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles. And they know that because of citizen science. People like me report, and there's something called eBird. People report what they see and record it, and that data is used to track bird populations. How you can help? Pretty obvious. I once had a yellow-billed cuckoo fly into my window, and I didn't think it was going to survive, but it did. It got up and flew away. But we put our blinds down during migration season. You can also put tape that's pretty much invisible to you, but the birds will see it. Use less plastic, so it's it doesn't get into the ocean. Use native plants so that the birds can eat. Drink bird-friendly coffee, because has anyone ever been to Central or South America and been on a coffee finca? It's instead of planting all these trees to grow coffee, it's just more natural habitat, and so they're not destroying the forests nearby, the adjacent forests. Avoid pesticides and do citizen science, and that's it. Yes.
Well, the birds that are so small migrate for such great distances. How high do they fly? And what danger do they have of being attacked by, say, raptors?
Well, one of the reasons that the small birds, songbirds, fly at night is to minimize the chance of being attacked by a raptor. And they fly lower than you would think. Like, I thought that the Lights Out program in Chicago was because the birds would hit high on these, skyscrapers. They fly low. That's why so many birds were killed at McCormick Place, which, as you know, is a low building.
What threats of windmills, wind farms?
That's an open question. Nobody really knows. They keep studying it. I don't think there's an answer yet. I think there is a way, there's something that I'm trying to remember. Does anybody remember? There's something that they can do to the blades, apparently, that minimizes the threat, but I think they're still studying that. Yeah.